you picked an interesting 10 plus years to get into strength and conditioning. Is like, I think the industry is obviously popularized in a lot of ways. And with that popularity has come a large influx of tech. And it's something that I find myself fighting against a lot, is the data side, whether it's in consulting, whether I'm even now dealing with athletes. The numbers are maybe pulling away from the subjective interpretation. And with a sport like basketball, where you have one of the more rigorous sports with one of the more rigorous schedules, how is your relationship as a strength coach to data changed over the years, and where do you kind of stand with metrics and tracking and in season? What do you find valuable? What do you find? Is this a touch point? We could pull it.
No, no, I mean, it's where do I stand? I mean, I'm still really interested on the tech side. But the reason why is I think it could, in the right setting, provide tremendous value for buy-in, for not for biofeedback, but for buy-in and for, scaling a process. And I'm not talking about like scaling an app or something like that, but you are you, right? Jordan, like, you have an incredible eye, you know what you can sit in a room and coach anybody, right? But if you have to manage 15, 20, 30 athletes, how can you use technology to carry over your expertise or your process, so that there is some continuity? That's one. Two, sports can be emotional, right? And so when there is technology and when there is objective information, it provides tremendous value, in situations, one where, whether you're right or you're wrong, in situations where there's finger pointing, where you're trying to understand why an athlete may not be performing one way or another, why an athlete got hurt. So retroactive evaluations. And then, there's the other piece. Some athletes are, they're also becoming increasingly analytical, right? So understanding why they're using data, why, jump data, force velocity profile, and all that, like, it is valuable for certain types of athletes. Now, I'm going to say all that and I think we're going to be aligned. Like, people are putting the cart before the horse, and they're not focusing enough on their on the interpersonal connection with the athlete, with the individual, on understanding how to coach, how to cue, and they're more focused on the data because it's sexy and it's where things are trending. So before all technology, before all data, like, if you can't coach, if you can't be in a room and make a lot of your decisions without that information, you're probably not a great coach, or you're just not focusing on the right things. And so that's fundamentally there. I see value in tech, having been in the roles that I'm in, but I've also seen, unfortunately, a lot of professionals that are unbelievable with the tech, but then you try to get them on the coaching floor and they don't know how to demonstrate, they don't know how to get under a bar, they don't know how to connect with athletes, and all they want to do is stare at their iPad. So there's a sequence of things, right? The delayed gratification has to come. Can you coach without it? Are you really, really good at working with an individual athlete? Do you understand your shit? Are you well read? And then go to technology, versus the opposite, where it's like, I'm just going to use this number to try to get a better output, and then I'm not going to focus on my own skills as a coach.
Now, have you ever had issues? Because I know when I am propositioned to provide data, it's usually by someone who doesn't understand but let alone what I do at large. Like, it's a head coach coming to me who doesn't know the difference between his elbow and his ear hole, and he wants me to provide him with some data without maybe even a framework to interpret. So one step further removed than the coach who maybe knows all about the data and no coaching, or the coach who knows all about the coaching and no data. A lot of times this data is being passed down, into a succession of people who, as you move away from the athlete, understand less and less, and they're really just looking for something that trends against wins and losses.
Yes.
How have you navigated the communication side? Because when I think of coaches who have transitioned into positions at NCAA or pro sports, I feel as if I'm always posed with the question of, like, dude, how do you communicate this with the rest of the organization. You
Mm.
know, we grow up in this stovepipe of people who speak our language. We deal with athletes, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's a grizzled general manager that's like coming into the weight room. You're like, this can't be good.
No.
And yeah, you have to have that conversation. What has that been like at your different
Yeah.
levels
No,
throughout your
that's
career?
such a good question. Um, so firstly, like obviously, if you're in a tough relationship with somebody of power who's asking for information, um, you have to decide how you want to deal with that. I can tell you this with good certainty. Collecting information is very different than sharing or using it, right? Because it can be insightful. Um, in many of my environments, like with the caps, like some of our reports used to have four variables on it. Like so we're collecting 20 or 30, but we validated a core piece, and they all tell a bit of a story. So if we're wearing GPS, it might be literally like a volume load, a perceived intensity load, one subjective metric and one other piece. But attached to that PDF is 3 to 4 bullet points. With our goal is the person who's asking for the information just wants to see the bullet points. That is a way, I can tell you, I know firsthand there's a really top rugby club in Europe, and the sports science group, they probably put in, $500,000 a year on these couple people, and they have this 12-page report that's going out to the coaching staff, and I can tell the coaching staff are getting it and they're pressing delete because it's overwhelming. And they want to, they feel like they need to, but they don't actually understand it, so they don't see value in it. Where to your point is like some people may ask for it. It is our job. If you're going to collect it, you have to be able to explain it to a second grader. And not to say the managers are second graders, but you have to be able to synthesize it. And our job, if you are going to use it, is to be able to be that insights creator, that 2 to 3 bullet points. And if it doesn't matter, get it out of that. Gotta get it out of there. Like, don't use it. That's the biggest takeaway for me.
Now, coming out on the other side of, ascending the ranks of institutionalized pro sports, and now sort of going full circle back to now it's on a 65-year-old dentist. Now it's one of the most prolific athletes on the planet. What is the feeling of switching roles now from, a team effort where there's a responsibility for the entirety of the players. There's a responsibility and accountability to your fellow staff members. There's a team aspect, which I would imagine, which would have been so fun in the time and place where you were coaching, to step out for work the day after and be like, I only
Yeah.
have to
Oh,
worry about one person now.
well, it took me a while. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, pro sport. I mean, my first year, I think we had 52 flights. I was away 151 days. It's a grind, but I mean, they take care of us here too. We fly well, we eat well, we travel well. But it was a bit of not so much in the summer because the summers were busy, but it was a bit of a shock. I had been in team sport for 10 years, so you know anywhere between 8 and 11.5 months, I was around a group of people, right? So that was definitely a bit of a shock. And off the get-go, when you're used to kind of moving at a certain pattern, and you're like, okay, I only have to focus on, and yeah, I know you work with individuals privately as well. You come in, you're like, I can do so much now. I have one focus. But the reality is you can overwhelm people if you come in and you try to reinvent the wheel and apply, energy that goes into 20 people into one person. And so, um, yeah, my mind was racing. I was like, oh, we can implement X, Y, Z. But the reality is you just have to come back to what does that one individual need, and don't put, you know, I was telling myself like, don't put, your expectations or your kind of rhythm of work, and just try to fit it into a bucket that doesn't make sense. So I had to took me about 6 months, 3 months after season to press reset and just recognize, okay, it's a different energy, it's a different expectation. So how do you maximize this opportunity given, that your last 10 years was very different? And a lot of it is doing less, but like doing less as not like, hey, I'm going to kick my feet up and watch TV. It's like doing less is recognizing that you may have ideas, you may want to implement more, but it's only because you have more time to think, to read, to educate yourself on how how to squeeze the lemon. And so it's a great question because not many people have asked me that, and it took me a very long time to take a breath and reset how I was going to approach one athlete when I've been working with multiple for a long time.
You know what? I've had similar tones of conversation with friends of mine that have been released from prison. It's like the similar sort of like, I could do anything now. It's like, that's overwhelming, dude. Maybe you want to go back inside. Like
Yeah.
it's that it is. I mean, luckily for you, it seems as if with the people you had around and the place and the players that it was a good experience. But I wonder if you hadn't maybe felt that before. You know, you talked about the transition into from working with Golden State to just Steph solely. You know, reevaluating the energy, seeing that you're going to be in a different place. You guys, what year? Because you said you came on after they won three.
Yeah, so we came in 2019. So our first year was when we lost to Toronto in the finals. And so we had a really good team, aging team, but really good team. I shouldn't say aging team, aging team. Um, they had been in the finals 4 years in a row. They won three or four. Then we went to the finals, so that was their fifth final. So they really hadn't had much of an off season. Then the next year, Draymond was hurt. We had a roster flip, or not Draymond, sorry, Klay Thompson did his ACL the year prior. We were the worst team in the NBA. Steph broke his hand game three. One of the biggest players in the league fell on his hand, and that was that. We were worst team in the league. It was a very different environment than what it was the year prior. COVID hit, long off season. Our third year, we were good. Like we competed, we were fit. It was actually a lot of fun given a COVID year. But we didn't get out of the play-in, even though we had played really hard. And then the last year, we went to the finals. We beat Boston, and that was it for me.
So that's 2022, if memory serves.
Yes, sir.
What talk me through that? Because I think there's a guaranteed 82 game spread where you're like, all right, these are our, like you mentioned earlier, here are our times of maybe slower game pace, maybe around an all-star break or around a holiday. How does periodization lend itself to coaching as you transition deeper and deeper into the playoffs? And what is like, are you walking on eggshells? How do you keep it
No,
together?
no.
You talked about consistent energy. Like,
Yeah, no, I can tell you this, like our team loaded right through until game six of the finals. Like we didn't know. Like it's a bit of you're right because even going into the playoffs, like if you watch playoffs now, um, the intensity is just so different. It's so fast, right? And series vary, but there's this thought process of like really tapering going into playoffs where I think you need to consider what does the athlete need to be exposed to, and are you making sure that those type of exposures are at least being addressed a couple times prior to going into it? So a couple of thoughts we had going into it was, if an athlete during the regular season is playing 32 minutes a game, but in playoffs they're going to play 36, 37, should we try to get games where they're playing 36, 37, um, in the regular season to get used to that volume? And then you can also, help them on the front end and the back end so it's not a risk, right? Um, are we hitting peak velocities going into camp or going into playoffs at all so that the guys have been exposed to sprinting, like sprinting. I mean, it's not sprinting because the court's so small, but close to sprinting, right? So it was making sure that the players are being exposed to what they will be exposed to as much as we can, but also finding windows that they can recover from it. That was one. Again, the concept of little bits often worked well. The core guys who were committed really, and our team lifted together because our leadership lifted, so the rest of the guys lifted. We were lucky with that. But there was not a window over, I think, a 12-month period that our leader didn't, get a decent stimulus, every 3 days. It just didn't happen, except for 2 weeks that were planned complete deloads, 2 or 3 weeks. And so game after game four, loading. Volume's low, maybe take out some of the eccentric phase work. So we're still working on good output, but without the residual fatigue. But we were going and we went, and that was something that was purposeful and something that we had a lot of pride in because we'd built up a lot of capacity, built up the engine over time, slowly but surely.
Do you feel as if having a veteran leadership core that was bought into lifting made that
It,
conversation not even
it,
a conversation?
100%. Yeah, Draymond had a cool podcast. I think it was on his own where he talks about that. He's like, I walk in the room, Steph's there. I walk out of the room, Steph's there. And if he's lifting, I'm lifting. And if I'm lifting, and he talks about that, but it's just quiet leadership. And like, it's in any environment, right? If the top guy or the guys who are meant to be driving leadership aren't committed to you or your staff, you're kind of hooped. Like, and it's not about, just catering to that person. It's about having leadership understand why you're there for them versus, not for them like as an individual, but why you're there for the team and the culture and what your purpose is. Versus at times, and I've been guilty of this at times, is like I just want him to be good in the weight room because I'm a weight room guy. Like I'm not going to go out and start talking about basketball like I'm a basketball connoisseur. I'm always going to preface like you're the basketball person, but tell me, how can what do you think we can do? Like how do you think we need to approach your process? Like build it with them versus being like I'm 10 years in the league, you're doing this. Like that doesn't service anybody anymore, especially with the way young athletes are now. Like they want to own their process. They want to be engaged. They're trying to educate themselves. Like building it together is a way to, you know, commit to each other, commit to the process together and have them have ownership in it, which in turn will help with compliance and consistency.
As you guys transition in new players, and maybe this is probably a universal question off sport, but I find it really interesting the contrast between soccer and basketball. One of the key things that comes to mind to me when I think about those two sports, just topologically, like I don't even think about not even anything about the schedules or anything. I think those two sports are the exact contrast or exactly contrasted from the point of soccer is oftentimes described as a weak man game and not like weak like they're small, um, where basketball is often described as a strong man game or a strong link and weak link game is probably a better way to describe it, where a soccer team is only as good as their worst player. A poor defender that's easily picked apart, good offenses will target that defender and they'll score and win games, where basketball seems to be on the exact flip side of that. And really, I think every other major sport would exist on a spectrum between those 2 points of like, hey, okay, strong link game, basketball. If you have a solid core, you will have a good team. Now, when you transition in new players, as you guys acquire new people in the offseason or smaller pieces of your leadership tend to leave, how sensitive is a weight room at that level to personnel changes, if you will, personnel being players in this case?
Ooh, well, it, again, I think it comes back to our earlier conversation. Is the leadership is the core group that's driving the weight room culture intact? And if it's not, if it's press reset, then it all depends on who's coming in. But um, again, I think being unwavering, being consistent, and having your processes known, um, and then organizationally, people understanding how things flow like that helps to create some resistance. But there has been scenarios, not I'm not talking about the Warriors specifically, but where somebody comes in who is definitely adverse to our processes, and that can be challenging, especially if they're good players. But in that same scenario that I'm referring to, I've seen that person who was meant to be a leader basically get drowned out because the rest of the core was committed to the process. So it can be super sensitive, and I think it's important that anytime somebody new comes in, that whether they're your 15th roster player or a top player, that they get up to speed right away, and they recognize what your intentions are with them to help them be their best, to help the team win. For everybody to follow the process of Kaizen, little chip away slowly, make little improvements on a regular basis, and make them understand whether it's different than what another group's doing. It's your, gym, your weight room's culture and approach to helping every athlete, regardless of where they are on there. So um, it is definitely sensitive, especially when you bring in, depending on who you're bringing in or who you're losing. But those really deliberate efforts to make sure when people come in that they're feeling taken care of, and that they're part of the process is one of the key drivers there.